Arya had always been different from the other elves in the crystal towers of Aelendor. While her sisters spent their days perfecting ancient dances and studying the songs of power that had been passed down through millions of years, Arya found herself drawn to the wild places beyond the protective barriers. She felt something calling to her from the endless darkness of space, a pull that no amount of meditation or tradition could silence. Her mother, the beautiful Queen Celestine, had warned her many times about this dangerous curiosity. She said that such thoughts were the beginning of madness, that the world beyond their walls was too chaotic for an elf soul to survive. But Arya could not help herself. She had to know what lay beyond. When Arya turned 300 years old, she made the decision that would change her life forever. She walked away from the crystal towers on a misty morning, when the twin suns had just begun to rise. She did not say goodbye to anyone. She simply took a small bag of supplies and left through the ancient gates that had not been opened in 10,000 years. The guards at the gate tried to stop her, but Arya was too quick. She moved like water, slipping past their defenses with a grace that surprised even her. Behind her, she could hear her mother calling out her name, but Arya did not look back. She knew that if she did, her resolve would break. For the first weeks of her journey, Arya traveled across the purple grasslands of Viridian, exploring the caves and hidden valleys that most elves did not even know existed. The planet was far older than any of her people realized, and it held secrets in its stone and soil that whispered to her whenever she was quiet enough to listen. One day, while exploring a narrow canyon that seemed to lead nowhere, she found a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall of pure liquid light. She moved through the waterfall without hesitation and found herself in a vast underground cavern. The cavern was beautiful beyond description. The walls glowed with a soft bioluminescence, and the air seemed to shimmer with ancient magic. In the center of the cavern, resting on beds of soft moss, were 2 eggs. They were enormous, each one the size of a full-grown human, and they pulsed with a deep inner light that reminded Arya of the heartbeat of the planet itself. She knew immediately what they were. They were dragon eggs, a species that had been thought extinct for over 1 million years. The eggs were warm to the touch, and they seemed to recognize her presence. Arya felt her own heart respond, and she knew that this was not a coincidence. She had been led here. Arya did not leave the cave for many days. She sat with the eggs, singing to them in the old languages of power that her mother had taught her, languages that were used to shape the very fabric of reality itself. She sang songs of hope and courage, songs of a world that was vast and beautiful and full of wonder. As she sang, the eggs began to change. Small cracks appeared in their shells, and light spilled out like liquid gold. Finally, on the 7th day, both eggs hatched almost simultaneously. The first dragon to emerge was a stunning creature of deep crimson, with scales that looked like they had been carved from precious rubies. As soon as his eyes opened, they locked onto Arya, and she felt a profound connection forming in her mind. It was not like telepathy, but something deeper. It was a bond that transcended words and went straight to the soul. The second dragon that emerged was even more beautiful, with scales of deep ocean blue and silver markings that seemed to tell stories of ancient times. When she looked into the eyes of this second dragon, Arya felt the same profound connection forming. Arya named the red dragon Ember because his breath seemed to glow like living fire, even as a newborn. She named the blue dragon Sapphire because her presence seemed to hold the depth and mystery of the deep ocean. For the next few years, Arya lived in the cave with her dragons, teaching them everything she had learned from centuries of study in the crystal towers. She taught them the languages of power, how to channel the energy that flowed through the planet, and how to sense the presence of other living beings across great distances. As Ember and Sapphire grew, they became not just pets or companions but true partners in Arya's journey of discovery. They could sense her emotions as clearly as she could sense theirs, and they moved together as one consciousness split across 3 bodies. When Arya felt sadness, Ember would nuzzle her face and Sapphire would wrap her wing around her. When Arya felt joy, the dragons would rise into the air and dance among the stars with her, creating patterns of light that lasted for hours. But as time passed, Arya began to realize that the world was changing. Strange signals started to come through the quantum networks that connected all conscious beings across the galaxy. These signals spoke of a terrible danger that was moving through the stars, consuming everything in its path. The elders of Aelendor began to broadcast warnings to all the civilizations they knew. The message was always the same: the Vraks were coming. and no one knew how to stop them. Arya understood that she could no longer hide in her cave. The world needed help, and she had the power to provide it. She had bonded with dragons, something that had not been done in over 1,000,000 years. This power was ancient and immense, and it might be the only thing that could stand against the entropy that the Vraks represented. She spent one final night in the cave, singing with her dragons, preparing them for the journey ahead. The next morning, she emerged from the cave with Ember and Sapphire at her sides, and together they made their way toward the spaceport on the other side of Viridian. The spaceport was a busy place filled with merchants and traders from 100 different worlds. Creatures of all shapes and sizes moved through the corridors, speaking in languages that ranged from musical chimes to harsh grinding sounds. Arya and her dragons attracted immediate attention. The humans at the spaceport had never seen anything like them before. Some backed away in fear, but others stepped forward with curiosity in their eyes. Arya did not have much money or resources, but she had something far more valuable. She had information. She knew about the ancient weapons that had been hidden in the temples of Aelendor, and she knew the locations of places where power could be gathered and concentrated. She found a human trader named Marcus, who was willing to help her in exchange for this information. Marcus was an older man with kind eyes and a weathered face that told stories of many journeys across the stars. He agreed to provide her with a ship that could travel faster than the normal spaceports could manage. And in return, Arya promised to share the secrets of dragon bonding with any being who was willing to listen and learn. They made an agreement that would last for many years, and it was the beginning of a journey that would change the course of history itself. Within a week, Arya and her dragons were ready to leave Viridian. They boarded a sleek silver ship that Marcus had provided, and as they lifted off from the planet's surface, Arya looked back one last time at the world that had been her home for so long. She could see the crystal towers of Aelendor gleaming in the distance, and she wondered if her mother was watching her depart. She sent out a silent message through the quantum network, a song of love and gratitude for everything her people had taught her. Then she turned her attention forward toward the unknown future that awaited her and her dragons among the stars. The journey through space was unlike anything Arya had ever experienced before. The ship that Marcus had given her moved faster than light itself, bending the fabric of reality around it as it traveled. From the viewports, Arya watched as stars stretched into long lines of color, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic in their beauty. Ember and Sapphire seemed to feel the same sense of wonder that Arya felt. They moved through the corridors of the ship with curiosity, their large bodies somehow fitting perfectly into spaces that seemed too small to contain them. It was as if the ship itself was helping them, adjusting itself to accommodate the presence of the dragons. During the journey, Arya spent much of her time in the ship's computer room, accessing the vast databases that contained information about the galaxy and all the civilizations that existed within it. She learned about the Vraks in far greater detail than she had known before, and the more she learned, the more urgent the situation seemed to become. The Vraks had destroyed 17 planets in the last 50 cycles, and they were moving through space at an accelerating rate. According to the latest reports, they were now less than 10 light-years away from the human colony known as New Haven. If nothing was done, New Haven would fall within the next few months. The humans who lived at New Haven were a young species in terms of galactic civilization. They had only recently developed the technology necessary for space travel, and they were still learning how to navigate the complexities of dealing with other alien species. From what Arya could gather, the colony had been established about 50 years ago as part of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. The colonists were brave and resourceful, but they were hopelessly unprepared for an enemy like the Vraks. They had basic weapons and defensive systems, but nothing that would be effective against the entropy-based creatures that the Vraks represented. Arya made a decision. She would go to New Haven first and try to help the humans prepare for what was coming. She did not know if her dragon bonding powers would be enough to save them, but she knew that at least she had to try. She changed the course of the ship, heading toward the coordinates where New Haven was located. As the ship moved through space, Arya continued to study, learning everything she could about human culture and behavior. She wanted to understand how they thought, how they approached problems, and what motivated them to keep fighting in the face of overwhelming odds. When the ship finally arrived at New Haven, Arya was surprised by what she found. The colony was built inside a massive system of caves located on a moon orbiting a gas giant. The caves provided natural protection from cosmic radiation and asteroid impacts, and the colonists had developed a complex underground city that was both functional and surprisingly beautiful. The main settlement was built around a massive central cavern, and bioluminescent plants had been cultivated to provide light and oxygen. The architecture was practical but elegant, with buildings carved directly from the cave walls and connected by bridges made of metal and crystal. Arya landed the ship in a designated landing area on the outer edge of the colony. She was careful to send out peaceful signals before approaching, not wanting to alarm the humans with the sudden arrival of an unknown vessel. Almost immediately, she received a response. A woman named Kate was sent to meet her. Kate was the administrator of the colony, a tall human woman with graying hair and a face that showed both strength and wisdom. She approached Arya with caution but without fear, and Arya immediately respected her for this. Kate's first reaction upon seeing Arya and her dragons was a mixture of wonder and concern. She had never encountered an elf before, and the sight of two enormous dragons stepping out of the ship was enough to make even a brave person hesitate. But Kate recovered quickly, extending her hand in greeting. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, the voice of someone used to making important decisions under pressure. "I am Kate Morrison," she said. "I represent the human colony of New Haven. I assume you are here because of the Vrax threat that has been reported to your people." Arya took Kate's hand, pleased by the straightforward nature of the greeting. "I am Arya, and these are my companions, Ember and Sapphire. I have come because I believe I can help you prepare for what is coming. But first I need to understand your situation more fully. How much do you know about the Vrax? What defenses do you have in place?" Kate led Arya through the colony, showing her the defensive systems that had been put in place. The humans had shields that could protect the colony from most conventional weapons, and they had developed underground tunnels that could be sealed to prevent invaders from entering the main settlement. They had weapons of their own, including energy rifles and larger cannon systems that could be mounted in strategic locations throughout the caves. But as Kate explained all of this, Arya could see the doubt in her eyes. She could tell that Kate did not believe these defenses would be sufficient against the Vrax. As they walked through the corridors of New Haven, other colonists began to emerge from their quarters. They stared at Arya with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some of the children were particularly bold, stepping forward to try to touch the dragons. Ember and Sapphire tolerated this with patience, and a few of the children actually laughed with delight at the sensation of running their hands across the dragon's smooth scales. Arya realized that this moment was important. She needed to show the humans that her dragons were not creatures of destruction, but creatures of companionship and power that could be used for protection. That evening, Kate invited Arya to attend a meeting with the colony's Council of Leaders. The council consisted of 6 humans, both men and women, who held responsibility for different aspects of the colony's operations. There was Paul, who oversaw the engineering and maintenance of the colony's systems. There was Linda, who managed food production and resource allocation. There was David, who handled security and defense. There was Amy, who managed medical services. There was John, who overseeing communications, and there was Carol, who managed relations with other colonies and outside forces. Arya presented her plan to the council. She explained that the Vrax were beings of pure entropy, creatures that fed on the energy and matter of other civilizations. Conventional weapons would have limited effectiveness against them, because the Vrax did not operate according to normal physical laws. What they needed was a source of energy that could counter entropy, that could bring order and structure instead of chaos and destruction. Dragon essence, she explained, was exactly that kind of energy. Dragons had been a force for balance and harmony in the galaxy for millions of years before they were hunted to near extinction. If they could reawaken that ancient power, they might be able to create a barrier that would be impenetrable to Vrax attacks. The council members listened carefully to Arya's explanation. Some of them seemed skeptical, but others, particularly David and Carol, seemed to grasp the potential of what she was suggesting. There was a long discussion about whether they should trust this unknown elf woman and her strange creatures, but ultimately they reached a consensus. They had nothing to lose. In a few months the Vrax would arrive, and when they did, the conventional defenses would not be enough. At least by working with Arya they had a chance, no matter how slim. Kate stood and extended her hand to Arya once more. "We will work with you," she said. "We will learn whatever you have to teach us. We will do whatever is necessary to prepare for the coming battle. If there is even a small chance that your dragons and your ancient magic can save our people, then we will take it." Arya clasped Kate's hand firmly, and in that moment, a partnership was formed. Over the next weeks, the people of New Haven would begin to learn the ancient arts of dragon bonding. They would discover within themselves powers that they had forgotten they possessed. And when the Vraks finally arrived, they would be ready. But all of that still lay ahead. For now, there was only the beginning of a journey towards something greater than any of them could have imagined. The training began the very next morning. Arya gathered the colonists in the largest open space available in New Haven, which was a chamber deep within the cave system that had been carved out centuries ago by water and time. She explained to them that before they could hope to bond with dragons or to channel the ancient power that she possessed, they first needed to understand themselves at a deeper level. They needed to quiet their minds, to listen to the rhythms of their own bodies, and to open themselves to the possibility of connecting with something greater than themselves. The first week was devoted entirely to meditation and breathing exercises. Arya taught the humans how to sit in silence, how to focus their attention on their breath, and how to gradually expand their awareness outward until it encompassed the entire colony and then the planet itself. Many of the colonists found this difficult at first. Human minds were accustomed to constant activity and stimulation, and the idea of sitting quietly for hours at a time seemed almost impossible to them. But Arya was patient. She worked with those who struggled, encouraging them to push past their discomfort and to find the peace that lay beyond. David, the security chief, was one of the most resistant to the training at first. He was a man of action, someone who was more comfortable with weapons and strategy than with meditation and introspection. But as the weeks passed, David began to surprise everyone, including himself. He discovered that beneath his tough exterior, he possessed a deep well of calm and focus. Arya noticed this and decided to work with David personally, sensing that he had the potential to become one of the colony's strongest warriors in the coming conflict. After the first month of meditation training, Arya introduced the humans to the concept of energy sensing. She taught them how to perceive the flows of life force that existed all around them, invisible to the naked eye but very real to those who knew how to look. She showed them that this energy existed in everything, in the plants that grew in the cave system, in the water that flowed through underground springs, in the stones of the cave walls themselves, and most importantly in every living being. She taught them that by learning to perceive this energy and to direct it through their bodies, they could accomplish things that would otherwise be impossible. The breakthrough came when Amy, the medical officer, suddenly gasped during one of the training sessions. She had felt something shift inside her, and for just a moment she had perceived the energy flowing through her body with perfect clarity. It was like seeing a color that had never existed in her visual spectrum before, a sensation of rightness and power that filled her with joy and wonder. After Amy experienced this breakthrough, others in the colony began to achieve similar experiences. One by one, the humans of New Haven were beginning to awaken to the ancient abilities that had slept dormant within their species for countless generations. 2 months into the training, Arya introduced the humans to Ember and Sapphire on a deeper level. She explained that the dragons were not simply powerful creatures to be used as weapons, but rather they were teachers and partners who could guide humanity toward a greater understanding of itself. She brought small groups of the colonists to spend time with the dragons in meditation, teaching them how to open their minds to the dragon's consciousness and to feel the connection that could form between human and dragon. The first human to achieve a true bond with one of the dragons was a young woman named Maya. Maya was a botanist who worked in the hydroponics section of the colony, growing the plants that provided food and oxygen for everyone. She had been particularly devoted to the meditation training, finding in it a sense of peace that had been missing from her life for as long as she could remember. When Arya brought her into the presence of Sapphire, the blue dragon immediately sensed something special about the girl. Without any prompting from Arya, Sapphire approached Maya and lowered her enormous head so that the girl could place her hands on her snout. The connection between Maya and Sapphire was electric and immediate. Maya's eyes went wide and tears began to stream down her face. She gasped, "I can feel her. I can feel everything she is, all her memories, all her knowledge. It is like she is showing me the entire history of dragonkind in a single moment. When Maya finally released her contact with Sapphire, she looked transformed. She moved differently, spoke differently, and carried herself with a new confidence that had not been there before. She and Sapphire had bonded, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. After Maya's breakthrough, other humans began to achieve bonds with Arya's dragons as well. Kate connected with Ember, discovering that she and the Red Dragon shared a similar approach to leadership and responsibility. David, much to everyone's surprise, found that his calm and focused mind was perfectly suited to bonding with Sapphire as well, creating a unique situation where both Maya and David shared a connection with the Blue Dragon. This multiple bonding was something that Arya had not anticipated, but she quickly realized that it actually strengthened the overall connection and made the dragon's power more accessible to the colony as a whole. But as the training progressed and more humans bonded with the dragons, Arya began to receive disturbing signals through the quantum networks. The Vrax were moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Instead of arriving in several months, they would be at New Haven in less than 2 weeks. The time for preparation was running out. Arya called an emergency meeting with the colony's leadership to inform them of this development. The news was received with a mixture of fear and grim determination. Kate stood and addressed the colonists, explaining that they had accomplished more in 3 months than anyone would have thought possible. But they would need to accelerate their training. They would need to work even harder and believe even more strongly in their ability to succeed. She asked Arya if they had any chance at all of defending themselves against the Vrax. Arya looked at the faces of the humans who had come to trust her and believe in her teachings. She thought about Maya and David and all the others who had discovered the ancient power that lay dormant within the human spirit. She thought about Kate's unwavering leadership and her willingness to embrace something completely foreign to her people's understanding. She thought about Ember and Sapphire and the incredible power that the dragons possessed. And she made a decision. Yes, Arya said, her voice clear and strong. We have a chance. It will not be easy, and it will require courage beyond what most beings could imagine, but we have a chance. And more than that, we have something that the Vrax have never encountered before. We have unity. We have hope. We have the power of beings from different worlds coming together with a single purpose. That is something that no force of entropy can overcome. The colony's council members looked at each other, and one by one they nodded. They would prepare for battle. They would stand together with Arya and her dragons, and when the Vrax arrived, they would be ready to face them with everything they had. The next 2 weeks would be the most intense and challenging of their lives, but in those 2 weeks, the people of New Haven would discover what they were truly capable of achieving. The final weeks of preparation were intense and demanding. Arya worked the colonists harder than they had ever worked before, pushing them to their absolute limits and then asking them to go beyond those limits. She taught them advanced techniques for channeling energy through their bodies and for projecting that energy outward in focused and controlled ways. She taught them how to create barriers of energy that could deflect weapons and harmful forces. She taught them how to fight in coordination with the dragons, understanding the movements and intentions of the massive creatures as if they shared a single mind. David took on the role of organizing the colony's military operations with a new level of focus and expertise that had emerged from his bond with Sapphire. He worked with Arya to develop strategies for defending the colony against the anticipated Vrax attack. He identified vulnerable points in the cave system and arranged for defensive positions to be established at each one. He trained the colonists who had not yet achieved a dragon bond to use weapons effectively in support of those who had bonded with Arya's dragons. He created detailed plans for evacuation of civilians to the deepest parts of the cave system if the outer defenses were breached. Amy worked with Arya to prepare medical facilities for the wounded that she was certain would result from the coming battle. She trained additional people in basic medical techniques and gathered every medical supply that was available in the colony. She created makeshift hospitals in several locations throughout the caves, ensuring that no matter where fighting broke out, there would be somewhere to bring the injured for treatment. Amy understood that in a battle like this, medical preparation could mean the difference between survival and extinction for many people. Linda and her team worked to ensure that the colony had enough food and water to survive a prolonged siege. They expanded food production in the hydroponics section, and they located and cataloged underground water sources that could be tapped if the main water supplies were damaged. Linda understood that an army could not fight effectively if it was hungry or thirsty, and she was determined that hunger and thirst would not be factors in the coming battle. Carol and John worked to maintain communications with other human colonies and with the broader galactic community. Carol transmitted messages to other settlements, warning them about the Vrax threat and sharing information about the dragon bonding, techniques that Arya had taught to the people of New Haven. Some other colonies were interested in sending representatives to learn these techniques as well. Carol arranged for a few of these representatives to arrive at New Haven just before the Vrax were expected, bringing with them both new knowledge and new hope. John ensured that all communication systems were redundant and that the colony would be able to maintain contact with the outside world even if major sections of the cave system were damaged. Paul and his team worked frantically to repair and upgrade the colony's defensive systems. They reinforced the barriers that had been installed to block off sections of the cave system if necessary. They installed backup power systems to ensure that shields and barriers would continue to function even if the main power sources were damaged. They created automated defensive systems that could respond to threats even if human operators were incapacitated. Paul worked alongside the engineers of New Haven with a dedication that bordered on obsession, knowing that the integrity of these systems could mean the difference between victory and defeat. As the appointed day drew closer, Arya spent increasing amounts of time with Ember and Sapphire, ensuring that the dragons were at peak condition and fully prepared for the battle that lay ahead. She took them on long flights around the moon, allowing them to explore the terrain and become familiar with the approach routes that an invading force might take. She worked with them on coordinating their movements with the human defenders, creating strategies for how dragonfire and human weapons could be combined for maximum effectiveness. One night, just 3 days before the Vrax were expected to arrive, Maya came to find Arya in the meditation chamber where the elf woman sat communing with Sapphire. Maya asked Arya to walk with her, and the two of them made their way through the quiet corridors of the colony to a small cave that overlooked the external landing areas. They sat together on the edge of a natural stone platform and looked out at the vast expanse of the moon's cratered surface, lit by the light of the distant star. Maya spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been thinking about something and I wanted to ask you about it. Before you came to New Haven, I was content with my life. I had work that I found meaningful, friends that I cared about, and a sense of security within this colony. But I was not truly alive. I was existing, but I was not living. When I bonded with Sapphire, everything changed. I saw what was possible, what I was capable of. Do you think we will survive this battle? Do you think that we will be able to stop the Vrax?" Arya considered the question carefully before responding. "I believe that you will surprise yourself with what you are capable of," she said. "I believe that the bond you have formed with Sapphire has awakened something within you that was always present but dormant. Whether we survive this particular battle or not, that awakening is real and permanent. You will never go back to simply existing. You will always carry within you the knowledge of what you can be." Maya nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. She and Arya sat together in silence for a long time, watching as the star moved slowly across the sky. When morning came and they finally made their way back to the colony, something had shifted. The fear that had been present in the days leading up to the anticipated battle had transformed into something else, a grim determination mixed with quiet hope. The people of New Haven understood that they were facing something genuinely terrifying and powerful, but they also understood that they possessed something equally powerful, the unity that came from working together toward a common purpose. 2 days before the expected arrival of the Vrax, Arya called a final assembly of all the colonists. She stood before them with Ember and Sapphire at her sides, and she spoke to them about the nature of the fight that was coming. She explained that the Vrax were not monsters in any traditional sense. They were beings that existed in a different state than normal matter and energy, creatures that operated according to rules and principles that were fundamentally different from the physical laws that governed human and elf bodies. Battling them would require not just physical weapons, but mental and spiritual strength as well. "The Vrax feed on despair," Arya told them. "They consume worlds by feeding on the fear and hopelessness of their inhabitants. They grow stronger with each civilization they destroy. but they have never encountered a species that could stand against them while maintaining unity and hope. If we face them with despair in our hearts, we will lose. If we face them with hope and determination, and the knowledge that we are fighting for something worth fighting for, we have a chance of victory. She explained that the moment the Vrax attacked, she and the dragons would rise to meet them in the upper atmosphere, engaging the enemy forces directly. Meanwhile, the colonists who had bonded with the dragons would work together to create a barrier of concentrated energy that would protect the colony and prevent the Vrax from accessing the cave system. Those who had not yet bonded with dragons would provide defensive firepower and support. She emphasized that every person had a role to play, and that every role was equally important. As the assembly ended and the colonists returned to their stations to make final preparations, Kate approached Arya privately. Kate thanked the elf woman for everything she had done, for the hope she had brought to a people who had been facing annihilation. She said that whether they succeeded or failed in the coming battle, New Haven would never forget the impact that Arya and her dragons had made on their civilization. Arya reached out and touched Kate's shoulder, and in that touch passed a message of gratitude and respect between two leaders of very different peoples, united in their commitment to protect those who depended on them. That night, as Arya prepared herself mentally and spiritually for the battle ahead, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her mother in the crystal towers of Aelendor, and she sent out a final message of love and gratitude through the quantum networks. She thought about the courage of the people of New Haven, creatures whose lives spanned mere decades compared to her centuries of existence, yet who possessed a spirit and a determination that rivaled anything she had ever encountered. And she thought about Ember and Sapphire, the dragons that had become not just her companions but the truest partners she had ever known. Tomorrow would bring the battle. Tomorrow would bring the moment of truth. But tonight was for reflection, for gratitude, and for the quiet peace that came from knowing that you had done everything you could to prepare for what was coming. The morning arrived with no warning or fanfare. One moment the sky above New Haven was empty, and the next moment the sensors that Paul and his team had installed began screaming alerts throughout the entire colony. The Vrax had arrived and they were coming in fast. The enormous geometric shapes of the Vrax ships cut through the upper atmosphere, their black hulls swallowing light and radiating an energy that made even the most seasoned fighters on New Haven feel a deep sense of dread in their bones. Arya was already suited up and ready. She had spent the entire night in quiet preparation, and the moment the alarms began to sound, she moved into action with a grace and confidence that inspired everyone around her. She took her position in the command center with Kate and the other leaders of New Haven, and she opened all her senses to the quantum networks that connected her to Ember and Sapphire. The dragons had been resting in a specially prepared chamber deep within the caves, but the moment Arya sent her signal, they were awake and alert, their hearts racing with anticipation. Arya sent one final message to all the bonded fighters. Hold the energy barrier steady. Trust in your connection to the dragons and do not let fear take hold of your mind. Then she made her way to the external landing platform where Ember and Sapphire were waiting. The dragons were magnificent as they prepared for battle. Ember's crimson scales seemed to glow with an inner light, and Sapphire's blue scales took on an almost metallic sheen. Both dragons were fully grown now, each one an enormous creature of immense power and grace. The moment Arya reached them, both dragons lowered themselves to allow her to climb onto Ember's back. The moment her hands grasped the leather harness that had been specially prepared for her, the connection between elf and dragon became complete. Arya could feel the dragon's heart beating with her own heart, could feel his muscles tensing and releasing as if they were her own muscles. She was no longer simply riding on the dragon. She and Ember had become a single entity, a being of combined will and combined power. Ember launched himself from the platform with Sapphire close behind. The moment they broke through the external defenses of New Haven and entered the open air above the moon's surface, the full force of the Vrax assault became apparent. There were 5 massive Vrax ships, each one larger than the buildings of New Haven's colony. They were moving in coordinated patterns, laying down waves of destructive energy that melted stone and vaporized matter. The Vrax forces appeared to have expected minimal resistance. They certainly had not expected to encounter 2 enormous dragons emerging from the colony to meet them in direct combat. The first exchange was shocking to the Vrax. As Ember spiraled upward toward the nearest ship, He released a torrent of dragon fire that was no ordinary flame. This fire carried within it the concentrated essence of dragon energy, the same primordial power that had shaped worlds in ancient times. The fire struck the shields of the Vrax ship, and for the first time in the entire history of Vrax expansion, their shields flickered and weakened. The Vrax, a species that had never truly known defeat, suddenly found themselves facing a threat that they could not immediately overcome. Sapphire attacked the second ship, her fire creating patterns of light and heat that were even more intense than embers. Where the two dragons coordinated their attacks, their combined fire created zones of complete destruction that the Vrax shields could not withstand. The Vrax returned fire, launching their own destructive weapons at the dragons, but Arya was able to direct the dragons to move in ways that the Vrax could not predict. The three had become one consciousness, moving with perfect unity and coordination. But the Vrax were not simple creatures, and they quickly began to adapt to the threat that they faced. They changed their tactics, spreading out their forces and launching more coordinated and focused attacks. One of the smaller Vrax ships detached from the main group and moved directly toward the entrance to New Haven, clearly intending to breach the colony directly. Arya realized that she could not fight all the Vrax ships at once, and she needed to trust the defenders of New Haven to hold their position. Back inside the colony, David was already coordinating the response. He had positioned groups of bonded fighters throughout the cave system, and the moment the Vrax ship moved to attack the main entrance, the defenders unleashed a concentrated blast of energy that had been carefully prepared and amplified over weeks of practice. The blast struck the Vrax ship with tremendous force, and to the amazement of everyone who witnessed it, the ship's shields gave way. The ship began to fall, losing power and control, crashing into the surface of the moon with a tremendous explosion that shook the ground for miles around. That single successful defense gave the people of New Haven a boost of confidence and hope. They had proven that they could damage the enemy. They could actually hurt the Vrax. The bonded fighters who had coordinated the attack immediately moved into position to repeat the tactic, and when the second Vrax ship tried to move closer to the colony, they struck again. This time they had the advantage of experience, and the attack was even more effective. The second ship was damaged severely and it pulled back, moving to rejoin the other Vrax vessels. High above, Arya continued her aerial battle with Ember and Sapphire. The dragons were magnificent warriors, but they were also tiring. The continuous expenditure of energy required to match the power of the Vrax ships was exhausting, even for creatures as powerful as dragons. Arya began to draw on the deep wells of power that existed within herself and within the people of New Haven. She opened herself completely to the quantum networks and felt the energy of every bonded fighter flowing into her, augmenting her power and the power of the dragons. As this flood of energy flowed through her, Arya experienced something extraordinary. She could see not just the present moment but also glimpses of possible futures branching out, like the limbs of an infinite tree. In some futures, New Haven fell and the Vrax consumed the colony. In other futures, the defenders held their ground and the Vrax were pushed back. But there was one specific path, one specific timeline where something magnificent happened. In that timeline, instead of simply defending themselves, the people of New Haven and the dragons launched a counterattack of such power and coordination that the Vrax would be forced to retreat permanently, giving humanity its first real victory against the entropy creatures. Arya made a decision. She would pursue that timeline, would bend all her will and power toward making that particular future real. She spoke to all the bonded fighters through the quantum network with a clarity and power that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. She told them that this was the moment. This was the instant where everything would be decided. She instructed them to release all the energy they had been containing, to unleash it in a single coordinated blast directed at the Vrax ships. David understood immediately what Arya was asking for. He coordinated with all the bonded fighters, synchronizing their efforts with precision that seemed almost impossible. When the moment came, every single fighter released their concentrated power simultaneously. The explosion of energy that resulted was so vast and so brilliant that it lit up the entire moon and could be seen for light years in every direction. The Vrax ships, caught in the center of that blast, were buffeted and damaged beyond their capacity to compensate. At the exact same moment, Arya directed Ember and Sapphire to release their most powerful combined attack. The dragons rose to a height above the colony, where they could see the entire battlefield spread out beneath them. They opened their mouths and released fire that was not simply flame but pure concentrated dragon essence, a power that had not been unleashed on the galaxy for over 1,000,000 years. The fire descended on the Vrax ships like a meteor storm, and when it struck, the shields of the Vrax vessels failed completely. The Vrax, finally facing a threat they could not overcome, made the decision to retreat. The ships that were still capable of movement lifted away from the moon, creating distance between themselves and their attackers. The Vrax had never retreated before. They had never encountered a civilization that could actually repel them, but they understood in that moment that this species, humans bonded with the power of dragons and guided by an ancient elf woman, was something they could not defeat today. And so they left, moving away from New Haven and back into the depths of space, seeking easier prey. When the battle was finally over, when the last Vrax ship had disappeared into the darkness of space, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the colony erupted into celebrations that lasted for days. The people of New Haven had survived. More than that, they had won. They had defeated the Vrax, creatures that had conquered 17 other worlds and that everyone had believed were unstoppable. Kate came to find Arya in the meditation chamber, where the elf woman was resting after the battle. Arya's power was depleted, and she looked more exhausted than anyone had ever seen her. Kate sat beside her and took her hand. She spoke softly, saying that New Haven would never forget what Arya and her dragons had done for them. More than that, the story of this victory would spread throughout human space and beyond.